Have you ever hand-fed the very leeches draining your blood and called it family? They thought my silence and those six-figure checks were signs of submission, not a noose slowly tightening around their necks. Let me tell you how a daughter deemed entirely replaceable managed to tear down a parasitic empire of lies, arrogance, and betrayal in exactly 72 hours. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with me today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating and producing the content you love. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community, where you can listen to exclusive, true stories that are significantly longer, incredibly detailed, and feature multiple emotional voice actors bringing scenes to life in ways we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen right now or by clicking the Patreon link down in the description or the pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's perfectly orchestrated downfall, told through the eyes of our protagonist, Paisley Bennett. The ocean breeze sweeping through the open French doors of the Cape Sterling estate carried the scent of salt and sea, though it was entirely drowned out by the suffocating aroma of white truffles, roasted duck, and $50 an ounce imported perfumes. We were seated in the formal dining room of a multi-million-dollar coastal mansion, surrounded by the crème de la crème of local high society, a collection of wealthy socialites who smiled with their teeth but never with their eyes. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the long mahogany table, illuminating the perfect picturesque facade of the Bennett family. I sat quietly at the very end of the table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, observing the theater performance happening right in front of me. I am 31 years old, the founder and chief executive officer of Abyssal Apex Operations, a private conglomerate specializing in maritime logistics and deep-sea salvage. I spend my days dealing with steel hulls, freight shipping regulations, and the crushing pressure of the ocean floor. I build things, I fix things, I generate the massive wealth that was currently funding this extravagant dinner party. Yet in this room, I was treated like a mildly annoying ghost. At the head of the table sat Arthur and Eleanor, my parents, glowing under the admiration of their affluent guests. To their immediate right were the absolute centers of their universe my beautiful older sister, Chloe, and her flawlessly groomed husband, Julian. Chloe and Julian were the golden children, self-proclaimed art investors who had never actually sold a single painting or brokered a successful deal in their entire lives. My parents endlessly enabled their lazy, extravagant lifestyle, funding their spontaneous trips to Europe and their lavish wardrobes, all while praising their refined artistic sensibilities to anyone who would listen. To Arthur and Eleanor, Chloe's uselessness was viewed as delicacy, while my relentless work ethic was viewed as a lack of social grace. Halfway through the third course, after the guests had been thoroughly entertained by Julian's fabricated tales of attending exclusive gallery openings in Paris, Chloe turned her piercing gaze down the table toward me. She did not bother to lower her voice. In fact, she projected it, ensuring the surrounding guests would hear her demand. Paisley, Julian and I are going to need $500,000 in cash transferred to our joint account by Monday morning, Chloe announced, swirling her vintage wine with a lazy flick of her wrist. We are finalizing a crucial expansion for the luxury winery project, and the contractors are being incredibly tedious about upfront capital. The dining room fell into a brief, polite hush. I slowly placed my water glass down on the custom lace tablecloth. There was no winery expansion. The luxury winery project was nothing but a massive, gaping black hole of debt, caused entirely by Julian's catastrophic mismanagement and their shared addiction to throwing lavish tasting parties instead of actually producing anything. No, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. Chloe blinked, her perfectly manicured eyebrows drawing together in genuine shock. Excuse me? I said no, I repeated, maintaining direct eye contact with her. I am not liquidating $500,000 to salvage a vanity project that has been operating at a catastrophic loss for 24 straight months. You are drowning in vendor debt. Julian has alienated your two remaining distributors, and your current liabilities far exceed any projected revenue. The bank cut you off for a reason, and I am not stepping in to play the role of your endless ATM anymore. A suffocating, deathly silence descended upon the room. The local elites suddenly found their half-eaten duck incredibly interesting, staring down at their plates. Eleanor gasped, clutching her pearl necklace as if I had just committed physical violence right there in the dining room. Arthur's face turned a violent shade of crimson. The patriarch of the Bennett family could not stand being humiliated, let alone by the daughter he only tolerated because she paid his bills. He slammed his heavy fist down onto the mahogany table, making the fine china and crystal glasses violently rattle. "How dare you speak to your sister and your brother-in-law that way in this house?" Arthur bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at my face. "You listen to me, you ungrateful wretch. We gave you everything. You think your little shipping company makes you untouchable. You think you are the only one who can run things. You're replaceable. Do not forget that." The absolute audacity of his words hung in the air. In this house, the house that my company purchased, the house where the property taxes, the maintenance staff, the imported marble floors, and the very food on their plates were paid for by the sweat of my brow and the late nights I spent building Abyssal Apex from the ground up. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not waste my breath arguing with parasites who had convinced themselves they were the hosts. Instead, I looked around the breathtaking dining room. I looked at the glittering chandelier, the terrified guests, my furious father, my horrified mother, and my smug, expectant sister. A slow, chilling smile crept across my face. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed the exact excuse she had been waiting for. I calmly stood up from my chair. I picked up my pristine white linen napkin, folded it neatly, and let it drop onto the table. Without uttering a single word in response to his threat, I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. As my heels clicked against the marble hallway, fading into the distance, I could hear Eleanor's voice filtering out from the dining room, dripping with condescension. "Oh, just let her go. She's just throwing one of her little tantrums. She will transfer the funds by tomorrow morning once she realizes how embarrassing she is being." They genuinely thought I was sulking. They had absolutely no idea that my silence was not a surrender, but the sound of the ocean pulling back just before a massive, devastating tsunami strikes the shore. At exactly 8 o'clock the following morning, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office on the 53rd floor of the Abyssal Apex Operations Headquarters. Down below, the commercial harbor was a symphony of organized chaos. Massive cargo ships moving like clockwork. That was my world. Efficient, unforgiving, grounded in absolute reality. I walked over to my minimalist glass desk, flipped open my secure laptop, and initiated a protocol I had meticulously outlined months ago, quietly preparing for the inevitable day when the leeches would finally try to bite off more than they could chew. It was time to perform surgery. I started with their immediate lifelines. I logged into my primary corporate banking portal and pulled up the family sub-accounts. There they were, 5 platinum supplementary credit cards glowing on the screen, tethered directly to my personal wealth. Chloe used hers for impromptu shopping sprees in Paris. Eleanor treated hers like an endless fountain for spa retreats and useless charity galas. With 3 sharp keystrokes, I highlighted all 5 accounts. I clicked the red deactivation prompt. The screen loaded for 2 seconds before displaying a glorious, definitive confirmation message. Just like that, the endless rivers of cash flowing into their vanity accounts evaporated into thin air. There would be no more morning lattes at private cafes, no more designer handbag impulse buys. Their balances were zeroed out, effective immediately. Next, I picked up my phone and dialed the high-end automotive leasing agency that handled our private accounts. The Bennett family garage was currently housing 3 luxury vehicles, all under corporate leases I personally guaranteed. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett, how can we assist you today? The account manager answered. I am terminating the leases on the 3 vehicles associated with the Cape Sterling address, I instructed, my voice flat and businesslike. The silver Aston Martin, the custom Range Rover, and the luxury Mercedes. Cancel the insurance policies on all 3 vehicles effective as of 9 o'clock this morning. Send the recovery trucks to collect them today. Understood. Ms. Bennett, the tow trucks will be dispatched immediately. The manager confirmed without a single follow-up question. Money talked, and the person who actually signed the checks always had the final say. Arthur loved parading that silver Aston Martin around the local golf course as a symbol of his supposed business acumen. By lunch, he would not even have the legal right to sit in the driver's seat, let alone start the engine. I did not stop there. The Bennett family's social standing in the community relied entirely on their exclusive memberships. I speed-dialed my personal attorney, Marcus. Marcus, I need you to sever the monthly maintenance fees for the Sterling Bay Yacht Club. I commanded the moment he answered the call. Cancel the family membership entirely, no severance period. Just stop the payments and let the club administration know the Bennett account is permanently closed. Consider it done, Paisley, Marcus replied, his tone laced with professional efficiency. Is there anything else? Yes, it is time for the final piece. Activate the dormant liquidation clause in the Prime Real Estate Trust Fund. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Marcus knew exactly what that meant. The Cape Sterling property. You want to push the primary estate into legal foreclosure. Exactly, I said, staring out at the gray, churning ocean water in the distance. Years ago, when I purchased the coastal mansion for them, I placed the deed inside a highly specific, heavily guarded corporate trust. I deliberately buried a contingency clause deep within the paperwork if the occupants failed to provide documented proof of independent financial maintenance for 6 consecutive months. The trust would automatically declare the asset a liability and initiate a fast-tracked foreclosure process. Naturally. Arthur and Eleanor had never paid a single utility bill or property tax installment in their lives. They had been in violation of that clause since the day they moved in. I had simply chosen not to enforce it, until today. Initiate the paperwork, I continued. File the foreclosure notices with the county clerk before noon. I want the legal documents fully processed and mailed out. I will have the filing submitted within the hour, Marcus promised. I hung up the phone and set it down on the cold glass surface of my desk. The surgical extraction was complete. In less than 45 minutes, I had systematically dismantled an illusion of wealth that took them a decade to build. I had cut the oxygen lines to their bank accounts, stripped them of their status symbols, and set a ticking time bomb underneath the very roof they slept under. The ocean they had been freely swimming in was now completely drained, leaving them stranded, gasping for air on the dry, unforgiving sand. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the carefully constructed house of cards began to spectacularly collapse. Starting with the Golden Child, Chloe was busy hosting her quarterly charity luncheon at the Sapphire Room, a breathtaking banquet hall located downtown. The event was supposedly a silent auction for ocean conservation, though everyone knew it was merely a thinly veiled excuse for the local housewives to drink vintage champagne and gossip, surrounded by dozens of wealthy socialites dressed in designer silk. Chloe signaled the head waiter to bring the venue deposit invoice, a modest $25,000. With a theatrical flick of her wrist, she handed over her shiny platinum card, expecting the usual chorus of admiration from her peers. 5 minutes later, the maitre d' returned. His expression was painfully polite, but the silver tray in his hand felt like an execution block. He leaned down and whispered that the card had been declined. Chloe scoffed loudly, her face flushing with indignant rage, loudly proclaiming that the restaurant's archaic payment system was clearly broken. She demanded he run it again. He did. It declined a second time. The polite chatter at the table suddenly died down. Eyes darted, whispers ignited like dry brush catching fire. Sensing his wife's escalating humiliation, Julian puffed out his chest, offering a condescending smile to the table as he pulled out his own premium credit card. He handed it to the manager, assuring everyone that his private banking account would cover the minor inconvenience. 2 agonizing minutes later, the manager returned, no longer bothering to whisper. He announced clearly that Julian's card was also rejected due to insufficient funds. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. Chloe's carefully manicured facade cracked, her face turning ashen as the surrounding socialites exchanged mocking, pitying glances, entirely realizing that the Bennett royalty had no actual treasury. Simultaneously, at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon, a different kind of public execution was taking place at the prestigious Emerald Greens Golf Club. Arthur had just finished his 18th hole, loudly bragging to 3 prominent venture capitalists about his supposedly vast investment portfolio. As the group casually strolled toward the VIP parking area, the heavy mechanical grinding sound of a hydraulic winch echoed across the pristine asphalt. Arthur froze in his tracks. A massive, rusted commercial tow truck was currently hoisting the front axle of his beloved silver Aston Martin into the air. The color drained from his face before being replaced by a violently furious purple. He sprinted across the parking lot, aggressively waving his expensive golf putter in the air, screaming at the top of his lungs. He threatened massive lawsuits. He threatened to destroy the towing company. And he repeatedly bellowed, asking if the workers had any idea who he was. The lead recovery agent, completely unbothered by the tantrum of a wealthy older man, simply spat out his chewing gum and held up a digital tablet. The agent loudly informed Arthur that the primary lease guarantor had officially terminated the contract and canceled the insurance, making the vehicle stolen property if driven off the lot. Arthur desperately fumbled for his pockets, commanding the man to drop the car, but the tow truck engine roared to life and simply drove away, taking his ultimate status symbol down the street, left standing in the middle of the parking lot with nothing but a golf club and his immense pride shattered. Arthur had to endure the humiliating sound of his wealthy golfing companions awkwardly clearing their throats and silently calling their own private drivers to leave him behind. Back in the absolute tranquility of my glass office, my private cell phone was violently vibrating across the desk. It was an endless, glorious symphony of panic. By 3 o'clock, I had received 42 missed calls and over 90 unread text messages. I calmly scrolled through the notification log, watching the psychological deterioration of my family unfold in real time. The first wave of messages from Chloe was filled with arrogant demands, commanding me to fix my stupid banking glitch right this second because I was embarrassing her in front of important people. An hour later, the tone violently shifted. Arthur's texts were typed entirely in capital letters, furiously demanding that I answer the phone and threatening to disown me if I did not fix the car situation immediately. But by the time late afternoon rolled around, the arrogance and the anger had completely burned away, leaving only pure, unadulterated panic. Julian left 6 frantic voicemails begging me to call the bank to release the hold on his accounts, because his vendors were threatening to call the police for fraud. I did not listen to the voicemails. I did not answer a single ringing call. Instead, I opened the Bennett family group chat, which was currently flooded with desperate question marks and pleas for an explanation. I tapped the screen and typed out one single, devastating sentence. The cards are not declining by mistake. I am simply finding someone to replace my position to pay everyone's bills. I hit send, without waiting a single second to see the chaotic read receipts pop up. I held the power button down and turned the device completely off, tossing it into my desk drawer. Miles away, inside the hollow, echoing walls of the Cape Sterling mansion, Eleanor was standing in the grand foyer, staring down at that exact text message. The reality of her situation crashed into her like a runaway freight train. The perfect, untouchable facade she had spent decades cultivating was entirely shattered. The horrifying realization set in that they did not actually own the cars. They did not own the elite memberships, and they did not possess a single dime to their own names. They were utterly penniless, permanently exposed, and about to become the ultimate laughingstock of the entire coastal elite. You would think that after having their financial oxygen supply completely severed, my family would finally recognize the absolute reality of their situation. You would think the sheer terror of facing the real world without my protective shield would force them to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness and acknowledging the parasitic monsters they had become. But parasites do not apologize to the host they feed on. They simply mutate and dig their teeth in much deeper, instead of feeling a single ounce of remorse for their decades of exploitation. Eleanor and Arthur decided to launch a vicious, preemptive strike. They realized that if they could not control the purse strings through intimidation, they would completely destroy the reputation of the person holding them. They wanted to back me into a dark corner, entirely confident that I would eventually submit just to make the public nightmare go away and restore their pathetic, fabricated honor. Their first move was incredibly insidious and required a level of calculated malice I honestly did not know they possessed. They needed a weapon to use against me, so they actively hunted for one and found it in the form of a disgruntled former financial officer. I had personally fired this man from Abyssal Apex Operations exactly 2 years prior for gross incompetence and corporate negligence. Operating purely on spite, Julian and Arthur somehow managed to scrape together enough borrowed cash from shady associates to bribe this disgraced accountant. Working in secret, they spent 48 hours meticulously fabricating a massive pile of fraudulent corporate ledgers and falsified bank transfer records. They backdated digital signatures and created phantom wire transfers disguised as initial startup loans originating from Arthur's name. The narrative they engineered was brilliantly evil. They were going to publicly claim that I never built my company through my own grueling hard work, late nights, or strategic investments. Instead, they forged documents showing that the initial seed capital for my maritime empire was entirely embezzled from my parents' lifelong retirement savings. They aggressively painted a picture of a deceitful, sociopathic daughter who had secretly drained the family accounts to build her own private kingdom, purposely leaving her frail, elderly parents completely destitute. Armed with this heavily doctored evidence, Eleanor orchestrated the performance of a lifetime. She contacted a prominent local television news network widely known for sensationalizing wealthy community scandals. Sitting on a plush velvet couch under the bright studio lights, my mother delivered an Oscar-worthy, tear-soaked monologue. She purposely wore a simple, unbranded beige sweater, a stark and calculated contrast to the $10,000 diamond necklaces she usually flaunted at her country club galas. I watched the live broadcast from the cold, quiet sanctuary of my glass office. She openly wept on national television, clutching a crumpled tissue, spinning a tragic tale of how she and Arthur had sacrificed absolutely everything to give me a head start in the harsh business world, only for me to ruthlessly abandon them in their old age. "We trusted her with everything," Eleanor choked out, wiping a single, perfectly timed tear from her cheek as she looked directly into the camera lens. "We gave her our entire life savings to help her build her dreams, and now she has locked us out in the cold. We just want our daughter back, and we want what is rightfully ours." The news anchor looked heartbroken, offering a sympathetic hand to my mother's trembling shoulder. It was a terrifying masterclass in psychological manipulation, and the viewing public swallowed the bait immediately. While Eleanor masterfully controlled the traditional airwaves, Chloe and Julian mobilized their vast army of superficial connections to wage a relentless digital war. Chloe recorded dozens of agonizing, melodramatic videos for her online followers, completely framing herself as the protective older sister desperately trying to save her helpless parents from a financial predator. She tagged my company's official pages, directing a tidal wave of hatred toward my brand. Julian aggressively leveraged his supposed artistic and business networks, sending direct messages to my top 30 clients on professional networking sites, spreading venomous rumors about my unethical business practices. The smear campaign spread like wildfire across the entire coastal elite community. The public court of opinion is incredibly fickle and loves to watch a successful woman fall from grace. Within just 3 days, I was officially branded as the most ruthless, cold-blooded villain in the entire state of Massachusetts. The constant, suffocating barrage of bad press quickly started bleeding into my actual reality. My corporate phone lines began ringing for entirely different reasons. A major European freight client, whom I had spent 6 months negotiating a massive salvage deal with, abruptly paused their contract, officially citing a need to distance their corporate brand from the unfolding public relations disaster. Two of my minor logistics partners indefinitely suspended their upcoming shipments. My own board of directors began sending nervous, urgent emails requesting an emergency meeting to address the scandalous allegations. Sensing the shifting tide and smelling blood in the water, the Bennett family deployed their ultimate, fatal weapon, believing that the crushing weight of public hatred and the sudden, terrifying instability of my company would finally break my spirit. They dragged me into the legal system. On a rainy Thursday morning, a licensed process server walked right past the security desk in the lobby of Abyssal Apex Operations and handed my receptionist a thick, heavily bound stack of legal documents. I had been officially sued. Arthur and Eleanor, armed with their forged financial ledgers and a team of aggressively ambitious lawyers working purely on contingency, had filed an emergency injunction in the district court. They formally requested a total, immediate freeze on all my personal assets and a temporary suspension of my executive control over Abyssal Apex. Their legal argument boldly demanded the immediate restitution of their completely fictional retirement fund and formally claimed rightful ownership over 50% of my corporate shares as financial compensation for my supposed elder abuse. They were entirely convinced that they had finally outsmarted me. They thought I would be absolutely terrified of a messy public trial, terrified of losing the company I loved, and terrified of the sheer, unbearable humiliation they were throwing my way. They genuinely believed that by the end of the week, the pressure would become so agonizing that I would be the one kneeling on the pristine marble floor of the Cape Sterling estate, handing over the keys to my entire kingdom just to stop the bleeding and make the pain go away. It was, admittedly, a perfectly constructed, suffocating lie. But the fundamental problem with building a perfect lie is that it only works if the person you are attacking actually cares about the opinions of the sheep being manipulated. And more importantly, it only works if your own closet is not entirely overflowing with rotting skeletons. The preliminary hearing took place on a suffocatingly humid Tuesday morning inside the grand, oak-paneled courtroom of the district court. When I walked through the heavy wooden double doors, flanked only by my fiercely stoic attorney, Marcus, the air in the room was thick with misplaced arrogance. Across the aisle, sitting behind the plaintiff's table, was the entire Bennett circus. Eleanor was dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, playing the fragile victim to the absolute bitter end. Chloe was glaring at me with a sickeningly triumphant smirk plastered across her face, while Julian and Arthur whispered eagerly to their aggressively slick lead counsel. They honestly looked like they were attending a coronation rather than a legal slaughter. When the judge called the session to order, their lawyer wasted absolutely no time. He stood up, puffed out his chest, and launched into a passionately theatrical monologue about corporate greed and elder abuse. With a dramatic flourish, he slammed the massive binder of forged financial ledgers onto the judge's bench. He aggressively detailed how I had systematically drained the supposedly massive Bennett retirement fund, painting me as a ruthless monster who stole the very foundation of my empire from the loving hands of my aging parents. Arthur nodded solemnly. Eleanor let out a pathetic, practiced whimper. It was a flawless performance, entirely backed by documents that looked incredibly authentic to the untrained eye. The lawyer concluded his grand speech by formally requesting the immediate freezing of my corporate assets and a transfer of executive control. He sat down, shooting me a disgustingly smug look. They expected me to panic. They expected my hands to tremble, for me to desperately beg the judge for leniency, or perhaps attempt to negotiate a massive financial settlement right there in the courtroom to avoid public destruction. I did not panic. I did not even blink. I had been waiting for this exact, fatal overreach. I turned slightly to Marcus and gave him a single, silent nod. Marcus stood up, his posture relaxed, casually buttoning his tailored suit jacket. He did not launch into a defensive, screaming tirade. He simply approached the bench with a slim, unassuming black leather folder. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice cutting through the heavy silence of the room like a scalpel. "The defense firmly denies all allegations presented today. Furthermore, we do not simply object to the plaintiff's motion. We humbly submit evidence that will entirely invalidate their claims and simultaneously implicate the plaintiffs in massive federal financial crimes." The smug smirk instantly evaporated from Arthur's face. The judge narrowed his eyes, leaning forward as Marcus handed over the black folder. "What exactly am I looking at, Counselor?" the judge asked, flipping open the very first page. "You are looking at the absolute unfiltered truth, Your Honor," Marcus replied smoothly. "A comprehensive, independently audited financial dossier detailing the actual origins of the Bennett family's so-called wealth over the past 3 years." I watched the color violently drain from Julian's perfectly tanned face. He knew exactly what he had been doing in the dark, but he genuinely believed I was too busy running a maritime empire to notice his pathetic, sloppy crimes. Over the last 3 years, Julian and Arthur had grown incredibly greedy. Living off my credit cards was not enough for them. They wanted their own illicit empire to stroke their massive egos. They had secretly used the Bennett family name and the highly publicized, perpetually failing luxury winery project as a massive front for washing dirty money. They had been taking in vast amounts of unrecorded cash from shady overseas investors, funneling it through the winery's bloated operating expenses, and declaring it as legitimate tasting room revenue or high-end barrel investments. It was a classic, sloppy money laundering scheme and a textbook case of massive tax evasion. I had known about it for 18 months. I had quietly hired private forensic accountants to relentlessly track every single illicit wire transfer, every fake invoice, and every shell company they utilized. I had meticulously built a fortress of undeniable evidence against them, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to deploy it. The defense has provided authenticated bank records, hidden server logs, and internal communications proving that Arthur Bennett and Julian have been actively defrauding the federal government, Marcus stated loudly, ensuring every single word echoed off the courtroom walls. The supposed retirement funds the plaintiffs are accusing my client of stealing never actually existed. The money they claim is missing is, in fact, the exact sum of the illicit funds they failed to successfully launder last fiscal quarter. Eleanor gasped loudly, her fake tears suddenly replaced by very real, paralyzing terror. But the trap I had set was far deeper than just exposing their pathetic winery scam. I needed to ensure they had absolutely nowhere to run. The plaintiff's lawyer jumped to his feet, stammering and desperately objecting, claiming that this was a wild distraction and demanding that the judge focus solely on the Cape Sterling estate, which they argued was rightfully theirs and unlawfully placed into foreclosure by my vindictive actions. I finally spoke. I stood up from my chair, locking eyes directly with my furious, trembling father. "I never owned the Cape Sterling mansion. Arthur," I said, my voice completely devoid of warmth. The entire courtroom went dead silent. Arthur stared at me, his jaw practically hitting the hardwood floor. "When I purchased that property years ago," I continued, projecting my voice clearly for the court reporter to capture every single syllable, "I never put my personal name on the deed. I structured the purchase entirely through an anonymous holding company, but the mortgage, the massive, 8-figure liability attached to that coastal property, required a physical guarantor, and 5 years ago, when you were completely blinded by your own desperate need to feel like a powerful businessman, I handed you a massive stack of corporate paperwork disguised as elite tax benefits." Arthur's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror as the realization finally crashed down upon his shoulders. "You did not read a single page," I reminded him coldly. "You simply signed your name on the dotted line because you loved the arrogant sound of your own signature. You legally guaranteed the entire mortgage for that estate under a shell corporation that has now deliberately defaulted. The bank is not just foreclosing on the house. They are actively coming after the guarantor for the remaining balance. You do not own a mansion. Arthur, you own a massive, inescapable mountain of debt." The plaintiff's table descended into absolute chaos. Chloe was openly hyperventilating, aggressively clutching her chest, while Julian looked like he was about to physically be sick right onto the mahogany table. Their lawyer was frantically flipping through his own documents, desperately trying to find a magical way out of the legal slaughterhouse he had just proudly walked his clients into. But I was not finished. The most beautifully poetic part of my retaliation was how they had voluntarily handed me the final nail for their own coffin. "Your Honor," Marcus interjected, driving the final, devastating blade home. "I would like to draw the court's attention back to the forged ledgers the plaintiffs submitted just 20 minutes ago, in their desperate attempt to maliciously frame my client for embezzlement. The financial figures and phantom accounts they fabricated to explain the missing money perfectly match the exact financial black holes the Internal Revenue Service has been actively investigating regarding their winery project. It was the ultimate, fatal flaw in their brilliant little preemptive strike. To make their enormous lie look believable, Arthur and Julian had stupidly used the actual, hidden accounts they used for washing dirty money. By willingly submitting those documents to a federal judge under penalty of perjury, they had legally verified their own illicit ledgers. They had practically wrapped their own massive tax evasion confession in a neat little bow and handed it to the federal authorities on a silver platter. Their lawyer slowly sat down, physically pushing his expensive leather chair entirely away from Arthur and Julian. He knew immediately that his clients were no longer just facing a humiliatingly lost civil lawsuit. They were facing decades in a federal penitentiary. And as for the injunction against my client's assets, Marcus concluded, delivering the final, crushing blow, it is completely moot. Recognizing the increasingly erratic, hostile, and legally dangerous behavior of her family, Ms. Bennett completely restructured her financial holdings exactly 6 months ago. It was absolutely true. While they were busy plotting my public downfall and crying on television, I had been quietly, legally migrating every single clean asset, every lucrative patent, and every single corporate share into an impenetrable new offshore holding company headquartered in a jurisdiction completely outside the reach of the local courts. The abyssal apex operations entity they were so desperately trying to sue was practically a hollow ghost, containing absolutely nothing for them to freeze or steal. I had completely insulated myself from their toxicity. Their vicious, coordinated attack had hit a titanium wall and ricocheted directly back into their own throats. By aggressively attempting to completely destroy my life, my family had flawlessly executed their own absolute financial and legal suicide. Exactly 72 hours after that fateful dinner, the grand finale of my meticulously designed symphony played out on the immaculate front lawn of the Cape Sterling estate, in a truly desperate, pathetic attempt to salvage whatever remained of her shattered social standing. Eleanor had organized a last-minute afternoon tea party. She had somehow managed to scrounge together enough borrowed credit to hire a discount catering service, attempting to convince a handful of skeptical local socialites that the rumors of their sudden financial demise were nothing but a cruel misunderstanding. They were sitting on the veranda, sipping expensive imported tea from delicate porcelain cups, when a convoy of 5 matte black, heavily armored government vehicles tore up the long, sweeping driveway, violently crushing Eleanor's perfectly manicured rose bushes under their heavy tires. Nearly a dozen federal agents wearing dark windbreakers swarmed the property. The lead agent did not bother to ring the doorbell. He pounded a heavy fist against the custom oak door, officially announcing the presence of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The pathetic tea party instantly dissolved into absolute chaos. The wealthy socialites Eleanor had so desperately tried to impress dropped their fine china, shattering the cups against the pristine marble patio, and practically sprinted toward their luxury vehicles to escape the unfolding scandal. Inside the grand foyer, the illusion was violently ripped apart. Julian was entirely paralyzed by fear, frantically attempting to hide a stack of incriminating flash drives behind a decorative vase, but he was tackled to the floor before he could take another step. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the vaulted ceilings was the absolute sweetest sound I had never heard, relayed to me entirely through the frantic, hysterical voicemails Chloe began leaving on my phone moments later. She collapsed onto the expensive imported rug, shrieking at the top of her lungs, begging the stoic federal agents to let her husband go. When they dragged Julian out the front door, his expensive designer loafers dragging humiliatingly across the stone steps, Chloe pulled out her phone and called me 14 times in a row. She wailed into the receiver, begging her little sister to wire bail money, begging me to hire the best defense team in the state, and pleading with me to fix the shattered pieces of her perfect life. I listened to the very first voicemail purely for the immense psychological satisfaction, and then I permanently blocked her number. Then came the ultimate surrender. As the federal agents systematically tore the massive mansion apart, seizing priceless artwork, freezing whatever hidden offshore accounts they could locate, and slapping a massive federal foreclosure notice directly onto the front door. My father broke, Arthur, the proud patriarch who had spent his entire life treating me like an expendable workhorse, realized he was facing decades in a federal penitentiary and total, irreversible bankruptcy. He fell to his knees in the middle of his ruined kingdom. My phone buzzed one final time. It was Arthur. I answered the call, pressing the sleek device to my ear, but I did not say a single word. I let him speak first. "Paisley, please," Arthur sobbed into the receiver. The booming, tyrannical voice that had commanded the dining room just 3 nights ago was completely gone, replaced by the pathetic, sniveling whimper of a broken, terrified old man. "Please, sweetheart, you have to help us. They are taking everything. They are taking the house. They took Julian. You have all those high-powered lawyers. You have the money. Please, I will do anything. I will make it up to you. I swear on my absolute life. You are my only daughter. Paisley, my only real daughter. Just save us." I stood on the polished teak deck of the Abyssal Apex flagship research yacht, entirely surrounded by the vast, endless expanse of the deep blue ocean. The crisp, salty wind filled my lungs, entirely free of the suffocating stench of their greed. I looked out at the distant horizon, watching the bright sun reflect off the crashing waves. "I cannot help you, Arthur," I replied, my voice as cold, calm, and unyielding as the sea itself. "But do not worry. I am absolutely certain that your replacement will take care of this for you." I ended the call. I did not wait to hear his agonizing scream of realization. I removed the internal memory card from my private device, snapped the tiny piece of plastic completely in half, and tossed it casually over the railing. I watched it sink beneath the churning white foam, disappearing into the dark, freezing depths of the ocean forever. There were no tears. There was no lingering guilt or tragic sense of loss. When you finally cut away the deadly cancer that has been slowly draining your life force for 3 decades, you do not mourn the tumor. You simply take a deep breath and enjoy the profound sensation of being fully alive. I turned my back on the mainland and walked toward the captain's bridge. I was entirely free. I was no longer a shadow, no longer a financial hostage, and no longer the silent bankroll for a family of ungrateful leeches. I was the sole architect of my own empire, entirely untouchable, and the era of the parasites was permanently over. Thank you so incredibly much for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I truly appreciate every single one of you for lending me your time and your ears today. Please let me know down in the comments where you are currently listening from, because I absolutely love seeing how far these stories travel around the globe. If you found today's perfectly orchestrated revenge satisfying and you want to support the channel during this difficult time without YouTube monetization, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. There, you can listen to our most exclusive, unbelievable true stories that are simply too intense, too long, and too detailed to ever make it onto public YouTube. You can join our amazing community right now by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct Patreon link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your endless support. Stay safe. And remember to never let anyone treat you like you are replaceable.